As a Templar Knight, you weren't joining a brotherhood. You were erasing yourself. New name, no possessions, total obedience. So why did nobles line up for years just to eat off the floor and die young? Forget everything you think you know about joining a medieval military order. This wasn't some casual weekend warrior club where you showed up with a sword and called yourself a knight. The Templars? They were pickier than a 5-star restaurant with a 1-month waiting list. Most boys who dreamed of wearing that famous white mantle with the red cross started their journey around 13 or 14 years old. But here's the catch. You couldn't just be any random peasant kid with big dreams. Your family needed connections, money, or preferably both. Noble blood helped, but even then, Daddy's gold couldn't guarantee you'd make it through their brutal selection process. The application process would make today's college admissions look like a joke. First, you faced a panel of seasoned Templars who grilled you harder than a prosecuting attorney. They wanted to know everything about your family, your debts, your health, even whether you were secretly married. And yes, some foolish boys tried to hide wives back home. Bad move. The Templars had their ways of finding out. But let's say you impressed them during the interviews. Well, congratulations. Now came the really fun part. You had to swear 3 oaths that would control every aspect of your life until you died. Poverty meant kissing goodbye to personal wealth forever. Chastity? No romantic relationships? Period. Not even holding hands with your cousin at family gatherings. Obedience meant following orders without question, even if your commander told you to scrub the chapel floor with your own toothbrush. Then there was the purification ritual. Picture this. Grown men watching you like hawks as you demonstrated your commitment through ceremonies that tested your resolve. Some candidates broke down crying and ran home to mama. Smart choice, honestly. Training began immediately for those who survived the initial hazing. You learned to fight with sword, lance, and shield until your arms felt like overcooked noodles. But fighting was just the beginning. These warrior monks expected you to care for destriers, those massive war horses that cost more than most people's houses. Drop dead from exhaustion while grooming your horse? Too bad. The animal came first. Prayer schedules were relentless. Dawn prayers, midday prayers, evening prayers, midnight prayers. Your knees developed permanent calluses from all that kneeling. Meanwhile, you memorized hundreds of rules about everything from how to eat soup to proper sword maintenance. The rejection rate was astronomical. For every 100 eager young men who applied, maybe 5 actually received that coveted white mantle. The rest went home with their tails between their legs, probably relieved they wouldn't have to wake up at 4 a.m. for the rest of their lives. But what happened to those lucky few who did make it through this medieval boot camp from hell? Well, that's when the real challenge began. Forget hitting the snooze button. Templar Knights were up before the rooster even thought about crowing, stumbling out of bed for their first prayer session of the day. And I mean stumbling. These weren't morning people by choice. Their entire existence revolved around something called the Rule. Think of it as the world's most detailed employee handbook, except this one had over 700 regulations covering everything from how to breathe properly during prayer to the correct way to fold your underwear. Well, maybe not underwear, but you get the idea. The Rule dictated when they ate, when they prayed, when they slept, and probably when they were allowed to scratch an itch. Medieval micromanagement at its finest. Mealtime was particularly brutal. Picture this. Dozens of armed warriors sitting in complete silence while someone droned on reading Bible passages. No, pass the salt. No, how about that weather? Absolutely nothing. One peep and you'd be doing penance for weeks. Makes family dinner arguments seem pretty appealing, doesn't it? But here's the weird part. They actually seem to enjoy this rigid structure. These were guys who could have been living it up in castles, chasing women, and drinking wine until dawn. Instead, they chose a life where someone else scheduled their bathroom breaks. After their silent breakfast, it was straight to horse duty. And let me tell you, taking care of a medieval war horse was no joke. These weren't cute ponies from a petting zoo. These were massive, temperamental beasts that could crush your foot without breaking stride. Each knight spent hours grooming, feeding, and checking their horse for injuries or illness. Then came weapons practice. Swords don't stay sharp by themselves, and armor doesn't polish itself. Knights would spend countless hours maintaining their gear, practicing combat techniques, and making sure everything was battle-ready. because in their line of work, a dull blade wasn't just embarrassing, it was deadly. The really amazing thing, every single activity was supervised. Privacy was about as common as unicorns. Someone was always watching, always checking, always making sure you followed the rule. Even sleep had regulations. What time you went to bed, how you arranged your blanket, probably even which side you were supposed to lie on. This wasn't summer camp with evening prayers. This was a complete transformation of human behavior, turning individual warriors into a unified fighting machine. Every knight moved in sync because they'd been programmed to do so from day one. And speaking of programming, wait until you see where these highly trained warriors actually lived. The accommodations might surprise you, and not necessarily in a good way. The Templar commandery was designed for efficiency, not comfort. Home sweet home for a Templar knight wasn't exactly what you'd call cozy. These warriors lived in shared dormitories called commanderies or preceptories, scattered across medieval Europe like a network of military monasteries. Think of them as medieval barracks, but with way more praying and zero privacy. Walking into a Templar commandery was like stepping into the world's most organized summer camp. Everything had its place, and everyone had their role. The buildings themselves were built for function, not comfort. Stone walls, practical layouts, and absolutely zero decoration that might distract from godly thoughts. Each knight got his own sleeping space, but calling it a room would be generous. More like a designated corner, with a plain wooden bed, a simple chest for storing armor and weapons, and maybe a small stool. Personal luxury? That word didn't exist in their vocabulary. These guys made modern minimalists look like hoarders, but here's the thing that really gets me. They couldn't even have their own blankets. Everything was communal property, right down to their underwear. The order provided identical clothing, identical bedding, and identical everything else. Makes sense when you think about it, though. Hard to get attached to worldly possessions when nothing actually belongs to you. The heart of every commandery was its chapel, not some tiny side room either. We're talking about a proper church where knights gathered multiple times throughout the day. These weren't optional services. Miss morning prayers because you overslept? Well, let's just say the punishment involved a lot more praying, usually while kneeling on stone floors. What strikes me most about commandery life is how it forced grown men to live like brothers in a college dorm. They ate together at long wooden tables, slept in the same halls, and shared communal washing areas. Privacy was basically a foreign concept. Even going to the bathroom required permission from a superior officer. The dining hall followed the same no-nonsense approach as everything else. Plain wooden tables, simple benches, and meals eaten in complete silence while someone read Bible passages aloud. Try having dinner conversation under those conditions. Actually, don't try. You'd end up scrubbing floors for a week. Every commandery operated like a small village, complete with workshops, stables, storage areas, and administrative offices. Knights didn't just live there, they worked there too. Blacksmiths repaired weapons, scribes kept detailed records, and everyone took turns maintaining the buildings and grounds. The brotherhood aspect wasn't just religious rhetoric either. These men genuinely depended on each other for survival, both spiritually and physically. When your life might end in the next battle, having trustworthy brothers watching your back becomes pretty important. But all this communal living and shared responsibility created something interesting, a military machine unlike anything Europe had seen before. Which brings us to how they actually organized this whole operation. Running a military organization with 15,000 members across multiple continents without modern communication? Yeah, that's basically impossible unless you have an iron grip on discipline. The Templars figured this out early and created a hierarchy so rigid it would make the military jealous. At the very top sat the Grand Master. Think of him as the medieval CEO, except his decisions could literally start wars. Below him came the Seneschal, Marshal, Commander of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, and other senior officers with titles longer than my grocery list. Each had specific duties that kept the machine running smoothly. But here's where it gets interesting. Knights weren't the only members walking around in those famous white mantles. The order had 3 distinct classes, and each wore different uniforms like medieval name tags. Full knights got the prestigious white mantles with red crosses, basically the varsity jackets of the crusading world. Sergeants wore brown or black mantles and handled everything from fighting to administrative work. Then came the chaplains in their own distinctive garb, because someone had to keep everyone's souls in check. The chain of command was absolute. When a marshal gave an order, questioning it wasn't just discouraged, it was considered a sin against God himself. This wasn't your typical workplace where you could argue with your boss over coffee. Disobedience meant spiritual and earthly punishment. Speaking of punishment, these guys didn't mess around. Minor infractions might cost you a few meals or extra prayer duties. More serious violations? Well, let's just say eating your dinner off the floor for an entire year was considered getting off easy. Some knights found themselves stripped of their mantles and expelled entirely. In medieval times, that was basically a death sentence for your social standing. The Templars maintained detailed records of everything: who joined when, who got promoted, who screwed up. They had to, because managing properties from England to the Holy Land required serious bookkeeping. Each commandery reported up the chain, creating an information network that would impress modern corporations. What's fascinating is how they balanced military efficiency with religious devotion. A knight could be leading a cavalry charge in the morning and copying manuscripts in the evening. The same man responsible for maintaining siege engines also had to memorize dozens of prayers. But here's the thing about such rigid structure: it worked incredibly well until it didn't. The Templars became so powerful and organized that they essentially operated as a state within states. They answered to no king, paid no taxes, and commanded resources that made monarchs nervous. This level of independence would eventually become their greatest weakness. When you're more organized and wealthier than the people supposedly ruling over you, jealousy starts brewing in some very dangerous places. Being a Templar Knight meant your soul belonged to God first, your sword second, and everything else came a distant third. These weren't weekend warriors who showed up for Sunday Mass and called it good. We're talking about men who structured their entire existence around prayer, confession, and spiritual warfare. The day started with matins at 2 in the morning. Yes, 2 a.m. While normal people were snoring away, Templars were already on their knees reciting psalms in freezing cold chapels. Then came lauds at sunrise, prime at 6, terce at 9, sext at noon, none at 3, vespers at sunset, and compline before bed. That's 8 prayer services every single day, whether you were stationed in a comfortable commandery in France or camping in the scorching desert outside Jerusalem. But here's the thing that really separated these guys from regular knights: they couldn't skip prayers even during active combat. Imagine trying to explain to a charging Muslim cavalry unit that you needed a quick timeout for afternoon prayers. The Templars actually developed battle formations that allowed rotating groups to pray while others maintained defensive positions. Talk about multitasking. Confession wasn't optional either. Every Templar had to bare his soul to a chaplain regularly, admitting everything from lustful thoughts to accidentally cursing when his horse stepped on his foot. The order demanded spiritual purity because they genuinely believed God was watching their every move, ready to withdraw divine protection if they slipped up. Then there was their mission of protection. Sure, everyone knows they guarded pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land, but they also became the medieval equivalent of social services. Orphan children, widowed women, struggling churches all fell under Templar care. They ran hospitals, provided food during famines, and even mediated disputes between Christian communities. The ban on female contact was absolute and honestly pretty extreme. A Templar couldn't kiss his own mother or sister goodbye. No dancing, no casual conversations, definitely no romantic entanglements. Some historians think this rule existed because the order feared any emotional attachment might weaken a knight's commitment to the brotherhood. Others suggest it was just medieval paranoia about women being inherently tempting. Either way, it made for some awkward family reunions. That red cross they wore wasn't just decoration, it was a permanent reminder of martyrdom. Every time a Templar looked down at his white mantle, he saw that crimson symbol representing Christ's sacrifice and his own willingness to die for the faith. Many took this quite literally, viewing death in battle as the ultimate spiritual achievement. Well, all this religious devotion sounds admirable in theory, but it created some interesting challenges when these holy warriors had to function as medieval Europe's most elite fighting force. When people think about medieval knights, they picture glory and honor. Well, the Templars got plenty of action, but glory came with a nasty side effect: death was always one sword swing away. These warrior monks weren't weekend warriors playing dress-up. They formed the backbone of Crusader armies as heavy cavalry, thundering into battle on massive war horses while wearing 60 pounds of chainmail and steel. Makes your gym workout look pretty pathetic, right? Each knight carried a 12-foot lance, a sword blessed by priests, and a shield painted with that famous red cross. But here's the thing, keeping all that gear battle-ready was a full-time job. Every morning, knights inspected their armor for rust, cracks, or loose links. One weak spot could mean a blade slipping through and ending your career permanently. Their horses needed constant care too. These weren't ordinary riding horses. They were specially bred war horses worth more than most people's houses. Lose your horse in battle, and you became an expensive target walking around in heavy metal pajamas. Between major battles, Templars spent their time guarding pilgrimage routes from bandits and building defensive castles. Sounds boring until you realize those roads were crawling with thieves who'd happily murder you for your boots. Castle construction meant hauling massive stones in full armor under the desert sun. And the weird part is, they did all this while maintaining their prayer schedule. Nothing quite like stopping mid-battle to recite psalms. The order ran its own medical corps because battlefield injuries were guaranteed, not optional. Arrows, sword cuts, broken bones, infections. Templar physicians saw it all. They developed surprisingly advanced surgical techniques, probably because they had unlimited practice opportunities. Still, medieval medicine had its limits. Getting wounded often meant choosing between a slow death from infection or a quick one from amputation. Then there's the uncomfortable truth about survival rates. Most Templars died young, either from combat wounds or diseases picked up during campaigns. Those lucky enough to survive major battles often ended up as prisoners, which wasn't exactly a vacation. Muslim forces sometimes executed captured Templars on the spot since these monks refused to convert or pay ransoms. Makes sense, right? Hard to negotiate with someone who's taken a vow to fight you to the death. But why did they keep fighting despite such terrible odds? Simple. They genuinely believed dying in battle guaranteed them a fast track to heaven. Death in God's service wasn't failure, it was the ultimate promotion. The irony is that their military reputation eventually made them incredibly wealthy. Success on the battlefield translated into political influence and financial power back home. However, that wealth would soon become their biggest weakness, attracting the wrong kind of attention from people who preferred their monks poor and powerless. Here's where things get really interesting. The Templars didn't just fight battles and pray all day. They became the richest organization in medieval Europe, and that wealth would eventually destroy them. These warrior monks owned entire cities, sprawling farmlands, and trading posts from England to the Holy Land. But their real genius? They invented medieval banking. When merchants wanted to travel from Paris to Jerusalem without carrying heavy gold bags that screamed, "Rob me," they'd deposit money with the Templars in one city and withdraw it in another. Pretty clever for guys who supposedly lived in poverty, right? The Templars charged fees for this service, naturally. They also loaned money to kings, funded entire crusades, and even held the crown jewels of France as collateral. King Richard the Lionheart basically put England in hock to fund his crusading adventures. The Pope himself banked with these guys. Well, all that wealth made people nervous, especially King Philip IV of France, who owed the Templars a fortune he couldn't repay. Philip had already expelled the Jews from France and seized their property when he needed cash. Now he had his sights set on an even bigger prize. Then there's the secrecy factor. The Templars held their meetings behind closed doors, had their own private ceremonies, and answered only to the Pope. In an age where everyone suspected their neighbor of witchcraft, this mysterious behavior bred wild rumors. People whispered about devil worship, secret rituals, and blasphemous practices. Philip struck on Friday, the 13th of October, 1307. That's right, this is where the whole Friday the 13th is unlucky superstition comes from. French soldiers simultaneously arrested hundreds of Templars across the country in a coordinated dawn raid that would make modern police jealous. The charges were absolutely ridiculous. Spitting on the cross, worshiping a demon head called Baphomet, kissing each other inappropriately during initiation ceremonies. Under torture, some Templars confessed to these absurd accusations. Others died before breaking. Their Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, initially confessed under torture, then recanted when brought before the public, but the damage was done. Other European rulers, seeing an opportunity to grab Templar wealth in their own territories, joined the persecution. The Pope, caught between political pressure and his own suspicions, officially dissolved the order in 1312. Jacques de Molay and several other leaders were burned at the stake in 1314. Legend says de Molay cursed King Philip and the Pope from the flames, promising they'd join him within a year. Both men died within months. Coincidence? Probably. Good story? Absolutely. The surviving Templars scattered across Europe. Some joined other military orders, others returned to civilian life. Their vast wealth vanished into royal treasuries across the continent. So ended the most powerful military order in medieval history, brought down not by Muslim armies, but by greed and politics.